Hey everybody, you're watching A Physio Named Jonah. That's this guy. In early July of 2022, my fiancee Nicole and I spent our first post-COVID vacation in Alberta just west of Calgary. During our time there, we spent almost the entire trip hiking while camping between the Lake Louise and Kananaskis areas. So the question of today's video is a hiking camping trip like this worth it in Alberta? I'm going to be sharing my experience of this trip as a physiotherapist, touching on things like pain, mileage, soreness, whatever it would make sense for a physiotherapist to talk about when we consider hiking. To accomplish this, I'll be breaking down each day of our 10-day trip out west, looking at things like overall mileage, elevation, as well as sharing one tip each and every day from a physio's perspective. But Jonah, you're saying, in my imagination, because there's no one else here, this whole video seems like a thinly veiled attempt to just share details of a super cool vacation that you had with your fiance while including some physiotherapy knowledge to make it applicable to the channel. And to that I say, day one, flying to Calgary. Don't fly Air Canada right now, people. It's not a good idea. Just don't do it. I know you want to go somewhere, but just don't. Friday, July 1st, 2022, our 10 a.m. flight from Sudbury to Toronto is cancelled at 5 a.m. because my favorite thing to have for breakfast is stressful sweating. They pushed us onto a flight leaving the next day for some reason, which didn't make a whole lot of sense, but the wonderful Nicole talked to them on the phone, talked a little bit of sense into them, and we left the same day just after noon. You might think that this traveling day would not include any hiking, and you would be wrong. Because of our delayed flight, we decided to go for a hike near our house that was about 3 or 4 kilometers long. We joked that it was a warm-up for the trip that was coming, and I hope this gives some context of who Nicole and I are and how we feel about hiking going into what you're about to see. As for the flights actually leaving Sudbury and going to Toronto and then Toronto to Calgary, here's where we can chat physio and pain for the very first time in this video. Sitting for long periods of time can be one of the worst parts of traveling and can be one of the things that causes the most physical pain for people when they go from one place to another. A couple things you can try and do to alleviate this. Number one is think about how you're sitting when you're sitting in an airplane. It's pretty easy to slouch down and kind of become one with the chair, but sitting up a little bit taller sometimes can help take some pressure off of your lower back or hips, whatever tends to be bothering you that day. The other thing you can do, and this is a big one if you're able to do it, is get up and walk around the airport if you have a connecting flight or while you're waiting for your flight before you go. I mean, you're going to be sitting on a plane and not doing anything for a little while anyway very soon, so take advantage of the fact while you're in the airport or waiting that you can still get up and move around a lot more easily. This can help keep you from stiffening up quite as much and decrease the pain that you get while you're on that flight later. We arrived in Calgary that night around 9 p.m. local time, where our good man Kevin picked us up from the airport and let us stay with him for that night. Kevin is an insanely good host, and he made us homemade pasta, salad, a whole spread that was ready when we got there. 5-star Yelp review, super host on Airbnb. You gotta eat here. Day 2, Mount Yamnuska. Yeah, this was a good day. We started out our week of hiking with what turned out to be quite the introduction to hiking in the mountains. Mount Yamnuska is a fairly accessible peak close to Calgary, which makes it popular. However, it's also the hike that has the most mountain rescue calls per year in the area. Cool. Being used to hiking in northern Ontario, it was clear within the first couple hundred meters that we were no longer in northern Ontario. The hike got fairly steep fairly quickly, leading to Nicole and I taking strategic photo and rest stops to slow down our mountain guide, Kevin. This is Kevin. Sorry, this is my channel, so he needs a more appropriate name for the channel. This is a captain named Kevin. A captain named Kevin is setting out to run a 100-kilometer race through the mountains in one day this summer, so you can imagine that his fitness level is befitting of his name for this channel, as well as that jawline. Honestly, Nicole and I were pretty much just trying to keep up for all of this day one hike. Mount Yamnuska is a pretty straightforward steep elevation walk for the first part of the hike, before becoming a bit of a more challenging scramble after that point. This involves a chain section where you're holding onto a chain and scooting around on a very thin ledge over a pretty reasonable fall. I don't want to brag or anything about how I did on this chain section, but I did almost lose control of my bladder. There was this bee that was in between my hands at one point on the chain section, which, if you're a bee, what are you doing up here? We are in the mountains. It was a rock face, there are no flowers. Why are you here? After some more fun scrambling, we arrived at the top where the summit was completely in the clouds and we could not see a thing. A sarcastic fellow hiker who was also disappointed by this said, "Welcome to the summit. Enjoy your panoramic views." I respect that. The way down then began, and so did my first introduction to using hiking poles, but we'll cover that more in day 3. The way down Mount Yamnuska involved one of the most fun and unique things I've ever done in a hike: scree running. This means there are long sections of elevation with a soft rock-sand combo that your feet sink into and you can just run straight down on. Nicole and I had an absolute blast doing this, and within a few kilometers of downhill later, our first hike was at its end. Quick physio note here on downhill sections: descending sections of a hike tend to be easier on your cardiovascular system or heart and lungs, but can be a little more challenging on your muscular system sometimes because of how much control the muscles of your lower body have to do as you're moving down a hill. Moving downhill requires a lot of neuromuscular control in order to control your momentum as you descend the hill, and Nicole and I were already starting to feel this challenge in our legs, specifically our knees. Consider that foreshadowing. The hike took us 3 hours and 54 minutes overall, which is a number that we got from Nicole's Apple Watch. She was tracking all of our hikes on her watch, stopping it when we would take extended stops, so we had a pretty reasonable estimate of how long we're being active for on the hike. In that time, we covered 10.38 kilometers of distance with an elevation gain of 911 meters. So start the counter with these numbers, we'll add in as we go. After this, we went into Canmore for some well-deserved relaxation before going home to superstar Airbnb host Kevin's for some delicious dinner. Day 3, preparing for Lake Louise. This day began with Nicole and I getting ready to leave Calgary to go to Lake Louise, where our camping for the trip would begin. We did this after waving goodbye to our wonderful host Kevin. He made us French toast for breakfast that morning. He made us French toast.
I want you to remember something when you get out of jail, pal.
I make the most flavorful and well-constructed French toast in Western Canada.
You got that? I've got it.
Can you believe this guy? No hike this day to add mileage onto the trip so far, as we just gathered our supplies, got to Lake Louise, and stopped at every mountain along the drive to go, wow, Alberta's really beautiful. Since there is no hike to discuss today, let's discuss hiking poles. Prior to this trip, walking or hiking poles were something that I liked in theory, but had never used or had any experience with. I now consider myself in the strongly recommend category for hiking poles if you're doing something for a longer period of time or with some elevation gain into it. They can make the distance a lot easier on your legs as they spread the workout between your arms and legs. The poles can also be really helpful moving up or downhill for increasing your stability, particularly if you're on uneven surfaces. And this other thing has never happened to me, but people who get swelling in their hands from long periods of walking, this can also help to decrease that because your hands are not dangling by your sides the whole time. So, using hiking poles. You want to extend the poles so the handles are right around your hip height. Thinking of having your elbows around a 90-degree angle at rest can be a benchmark to help out here. When hiking uphill, you can shorten the lengths of the poles a little bit to make you have to reach less and make the movement a little more comfortable, while when moving downhill, lengthening the poles can increase your control and stability. You'll see Nicole and I walking using the poles throughout many of the clips later in this video, and you may notice that we're not putting our hands down super hard. You just kind of tap the ground beside you to add that stability. That is until I got tired, and then I was attacking the ground with my poles to keep myself upright. Day 4, Lake Louise. After a night of being rained out at our campsite and trying in vain to start a fire in the rain for some reason, no explanation for myself on that one, we were up early to secure a parking space at Lake Louise. If you go to Lake Louise, arrive early. The parking lot fills up very early, so we were there by 6:30 a.m. Our goal for the day was to go up past the Lake Agnes Tea House and continue on to Mount St. Piran from there. We'll talk about mileage and everything later on and what this means for the overall hike, because the things went a little sideways. Alright guys, ready for my hot, controversial take? Lake Louise is pretty nice. Like, it's kind of cool. But that's just my opinion. Even on a cloudy day like what we had here, it was still incredibly gorgeous. Nicole and I walked up the incline towards the Lake Agnes Tea House, peeling layers on and off as we went. Once we got there, we walked up towards the Little Beehive Lookout for our second panoramic cloud-filled view of the trip to date. We were thrilled. Next, we attempted to summit Mount St. Piran, but the mountain apparently hadn't gotten the memo that it was July, and there was too much snow for us to continue. The visibility was very bad, and our path just led to a blank sheet of snow on an incline. Not wanting to fall down the mountainside, Nicole and I turned around and went back to the tea house. Tip of the day here is get yourself some spikes for the snow, as well as using the poles we talked about earlier. The spikes slide on over the bottom of your shoe to give yourself a lot better traction when you're walking through the snow. When you're walking in the mountains, there's a very high possibility you may encounter some snow. If you're on an incline, it's even more important. Thankfully, we did not have to buy any for this trip because the wonderful captain named Kevin gave us his spikes for the trip. Huge thanks again to the captain for keeping us safe. After having some tea at the tea house on our overcast day, we walked around Lake Agnes and up the switchbacks towards Big Beehive Lookout, where it decided to promptly rain like crazy. But in an act of defiance, the clouds decided to spontaneously lift and reveal to us the view of Lake Louise and the surrounding area. It was incredible. Nicole took a time lapse of the clouds moving through, and it's definitely one of my favorite videos from the whole trip. We had done multiple summits now leading up to this point and seen absolutely nothing, so to have it open up in front of us like this was quite magical. After taking it in for an hour or more, Nicole and I decided we should probably move on, as the whole area was beautiful and there was still more to see. The way down from Big Beehive towards our starting point, Nicole and I just kept taking turns away from our starting point to go find new things because we were enjoying it so much. This led us down towards the glacier viewpoint, but we decided to turn back towards the lake before making it all the way there because, well, we'd already gone a long way. By the time we made it back to the car, we had been hiking for 6 hours and 36 minutes. That's the active hiking time. That does not include the more than an hour that we spent at the top of Big Beehive, stopping for tea at the tea house, stopping to eat and snack. We were out for a very long day. In that time, we covered 19.07 kilometers of trail and put on another 908 meters of total elevation gained. This was a big day of hiking, and it brings our trip total to 10 hours and 30 minutes, 29.45 kilometers, and 1,819 meters of elevation. I probably wouldn't recommend just adding distance to your hikes willy-nilly without thinking about it too much, but hey, what can I say? We were enjoying ourselves, we were out, we wanted to make the most of it. I don't regret it. I was tired though. We got back to our campsite where it rained all night again, so we were in our tent and asleep by 7:30 p.m. Day 5. Lake Moraine. Well, it's a good thing we were asleep at 7:30 p.m. the night before because day 5 started before 4 a.m. Doing my research before going to these hikes, I had read that the Lake Moraine parking lot fills up even faster than the Lake Louise one because it's smaller. In order to guarantee a parking spot, they recommended getting there before 5 a.m. So Nicole and I did just that. We were in the parking lot by 4:35 in the morning. And it was not nearly full. It was also still raining from the night before. Love it. You know what though? The rain subsided, the sun started to show up, and we had packed our breakfast to eat on the rocks in front of the incredibly beautiful Lake Moraine. So the early morning was definitely worth it. One of the reasons we wanted this parking space so badly to avoid using shuttles was because our hike for the day was also in this area. That hike being Sentinel Pass, which was a hike that I underestimated because I thought, if it's not on the top of a mountain, it's gonna be easy, right? The trail started with a lot of switchbacks up to a grassy meadow area with some very cool landscape features, but the pass itself was the most fun part for sure. You get to walk along the side of this mountain bowl as you head up towards this viewpoint. As summer means nothing in the mountains, there was still a fair bit of snow along the path, meaning that this snow trail path was the way to get through the pass. We made it up and enjoyed the view for a while before seeing something interesting for our descent. A lovely little family of 4 with 2 children from Portland left before us, and as they were walking back down the snowy path, we noticed they slid down the snow path as opposed to walk along the bowl of the mountain. I mean, if the kids could do it.
Let's go.
Woo!
This is actually super fun.
Woo!
Undoubtedly one of my favorite parts of the trip. I would say this maybe is one of the coolest things I've done in my entire life. Nicole's face really says it all when she gets to the bottom. Also note here, as I was sliding down the hill, a water bottle in my side pocket of the backpack fell out, and you can see on this video Nicole grabbing the water bottle on her slide down, which was a major clutch performance, so we did not have to walk back all the way around and slide down again to get it. Or try and hike back up, but that would have been very annoying. The hike ended up being another 5 hours and 8 minutes of hiking time with 15.4 kilometers of trail covered. This included another 780 meters of elevation gain, which brings our total for the trip up to 15 hours and 38 minutes of hiking, 44.85 kilometers of trail covered, and 2,599 meters of elevation gained. My tip of day 5 here for hiking in the mountains is take way more layers than you think you need. The weather fluctuates very quickly and goes from really cold to rainy to really hot to Jonah getting a wicked sunburn on his nose in the blink of an eye. Nicole and I then decided to rent one of the Lake Moraine canoes. We spent an hour paddling around enjoying the scenery before heading back to our campsite, and oh my god, we had a sunny night at a campsite. Pinch me, I don't believe it. Day 6, Banff and Sulphur Mountain. Wayne's World. Hey, this outfit change, this is future Jonah from the same day, who is editing this video and realized that when my memory card got full and I changed it halfway through, a part of what I thought I had filmed did not get filmed. And so there's a missing chunk in the middle of the video. So here I am, coming back in to fill that chunk in for you. After we packed up our campsite at Lake Louise and got ourselves set up to go down to Banff, we were looking forward to a bit of a quieter day. You know, we didn't have anything crazy in mind, just doing either Tunnel Mountain or Sulphur Mountain, which were both pretty close to Banff. The plan was we would do one of these 2 hikes, go to a store or 2 in Banff, and then head over to our hotel in Canmore where we were staying for the night. We decided that we wanted to do Sulphur Mountain that day. It was still pretty gentle in comparison to some of the things we'd done, with being 10 kilometers but a fairly groomed trail. And it just seemed a little bit longer and more interesting than Tunnel Mountain Trail. So here's the fun pro tip of the day. If you eat food out of the back of a car in a parking lot, people will talk to you. Okay, I'm being a bit dramatic there, but what happens when you're traveling and you happen to be eating, sort of preparing and doing things out of the back of your car is you may have some conversations with locals, and sometimes those conversations with locals are incredibly beneficial. So the pro tip of the day here is talk to locals. If you can get some information from people who live in the area, it can be really helpful because obviously Google can only go so far. We had just a conversation such as this right before we went to go do our hike at Sulphur Mountain for the day, where this gentleman talking to us recommended that at the top of the hike, instead of going to the right and going towards the boardwalk lookout, we turn to the left and go over towards a more secluded little scramble peak where we would have some private views. This was going to make the hiking day a little more difficult and slightly more technical, but seemed like it'd be worth it. It didn't add that much distance on either. And with that summary of why we decided to turn left at the top of Sulphur Mountain and do a scramble, I'm gonna hand the mic back to previous Jonah from about 7 hours ago. Bye. But you know what? We decided that this is supposed to be our easy day. Let's turn it into a workout. Let's try and do this hike as quickly as possible, within reason, so that we can then get to our hotel afterwards. It was fun. We did in fact turn left at the top instead of going towards the boardwalk lookout area, and it was really cool. It was a great recommendation that we got, and I'm so happy we did, because we got these private, incredible views of the area, looking out over the same things we would have had on the other side, but getting to have an extra fun little scramble section to get up to the lookout, and then having nobody there with us as we were looking out over the area. I was so glad we made that extra turn to go to the left because it made the area so much more private. It was pretty much just Nicole and I, and we got to have a fun little scramble section up to a vista, which was beautiful. It was beautiful, really. We ended up completing the eventual 12.56 kilometer journey with 776 meters of elevation in 2 hours and 54 minutes. Making it back to the car quicker than we had expected, because we ran down a decent section of the downhills, which improved our time. Our trip total is now at 18 hours and 32 minutes of hiking, 57.41 kilometers of trail covered, and 3,375 meters of elevation gained, and then given back. Less of a physio tip here and more of an observation of what was going on at the time. Nicole and I were really starting to get sore on the downhill of this hike. As we talked about the increased challenge on the joints and neuromuscular control earlier, going downhill now after multiple days of hiking and a lot of elevation up and down, things were really starting to add up. We probably could have benefited from the easy day that we had planned, but you know, sometimes one thing leads to another and now you're running down a mountain. You can work on this with things like massaging the muscle, doing some stretching, or Nicole and I opted for hot showers after this part because we got to actually shower for the first time in a couple days, which was incredible. But like the good physiotherapists we are, we had a rest day planned for the next day, so I wasn't too worried about the soreness at the time. Made it to our hotel, went out for dinner, had a wonderful evening, and we're ready for a nice relaxing day the day following. Day 7, Heart Mountain. You may notice the title included a mountain. We'll get there. We woke up, walked around Canmore for a little bit. It's beautiful. I highly recommend visiting Canmore if you're in the area. And then got our groceries and headed over to our campsite. Our hike that we had talked about maybe doing on this day, but had opted more for a rest day, was the Heart Mountain Horseshoe Trail. This was a really cool hike that I had found on All Trails and seemed like it would be a good fit because the trailhead was almost right beside our campsite. The reviews mentioned that it was quite the steep incline up, but once you were at the top it wasn't too bad, and the scrambling while there wasn't all that intimidating. But I mean, we had kind of thought that this was a better rest day. We had put on a lot of mileage at this point. We were pretty ready, I think, for a break from hiking. Also, I mean, we got to our campsite a little bit later in the day than we'd expected because we did more in Canmore. It really looked like it was going to have a rainstorm coming in. We could start to see the clouds coming, the radar looked like there might be some rain coming in, and it just, you know, it seemed like it wasn't the best idea. So of course we decided to do the hike anyway, and about halfway up the incline section of the hike, we realized that we were up against it pretty good. This hike was absolutely steep, with a lot of essentially walking straight up the side of a mountain, trying to find different paths that were not very well marked, shall we say. I relied on my GPS on my phone a lot for this one, actually. It was also finally warm. Look at those warm weather outfits we have going. Someone had left a little screw-open time capsule at the top of Grant McEwen Peak there, And so when you got there, you could open it up, write your name in some of the little journals they have. It was pretty cool to read about a couple of the other hikers that had gone up there. We got to leave our own message. Very cool experience. Walking along the ridge was an amazing part of this hike because you get these sustained views of the area all around you, and there's just so much beautiful mountain scenery in this area. Honestly, it was probably one of my favorite parts of the entire trip. Oh my sweet chariots, the way down was a slog though. Thought our legs were sore the day before. We did not know what was coming for us on the descent of this mountain hike. It felt like a Herculean effort going down the hike this day because our muscles were just so insanely tired and sore from a lot of mileage. It was also a lot longer of a descent than we were expecting. More of a hiking tip here than a physio tip. Don't start your hikes too late in the day, especially in the mountains. We were a bit stressed out during the hike that we were going to run out of daylight just because of when we started the hike. It also meant that because we started later, most people were off the mountain, so we were probably some of the only people that were still up there doing the hike at that point. This turned into a total non-factor for us though because it was such a beautiful, clear evening, and it's the summer so the daylight hours lasted a while. We also crushed the hike time-wise and made it back much sooner than we both expected. But in general, really good to start your hikes earlier in the day. You don't know what can happen in terms of injury, running into things you don't expect, so you don't want to be running out of daylight and in the mountains. Not a good thing. This hike was quite the challenge though, and we spent 4 hours and 42 minutes hiking, covering 1,042 meters of elevation and 12.6 kilometers of trail. This brings our total for the trip up to 22 hours and 57 minutes of hiking, 70.01 kilometers of trail covered, and 4,417 meters of elevation. It was a lot. This really was one of my favorite hikes of the whole trip though, and maybe one of my favorite outdoor experiences ever. Was it a mistake to do it on what was considered a rest day for us potentially? Maybe. But I don't regret it because it was such an incredible experience and Nicole and I turned out to be totally fine afterwards. So does that make it a mistake? It's hard to say. I think there was a much better way of periodizing our mileage and not putting so much all packed together, spreading it out a little bit more. But the day was perfect and we had a wonderful hike. So no regrets. Day 8, Jewell Pass via Prairie View Trail. This was our 5th day of hiking in a row. Nicole had to tape up parts of her feet because of blisters there, and the skin around my hips was getting very irritated from having a backpack rubbing against it for a long period of time. This was a really fun day though because we met up with Nicole's aunt and uncle who live just south of Calgary. They are avid, very experienced hikers in their own right, so they decided to show us around to a trail that they had wanted to try out. This turned out to be the Prairie View Trail with connection to Jewell Pass, and this is a very beautiful trail. One of my favorite moments from the day was when Nicole's uncle and I walked up this extra little extension to get a little viewpoint from the Firewatch Tower that looked out over top of the area. We met this really nice hiker who chatted with us as we were walking up towards the Firewatch Tower to get some views from up there. It then became clear to us as we were walking that he was in fact the gentleman living at the Firewatch Tower for the summer. He was very cool and let us come onto his property for a second to take a look at the surrounding area. He also spent some of his time while up in the Firewatch Towers writing and recording music. He is Mountain Mansion on Spotify, and I have been listening to some of his stuff while writing the script for this, while I was filming, preparing for this sort of thing. It's actually really good. I recommend you check him out. I like the song Tiara Peak, but again, send some love his way. Check him out, Mountain Mansion on Spotify. Super cool guy with a musical vibe that is definitely as chill as he is. Anyway, back to the hiking. Another gorgeous and warm, clear day here to make up for the cloudy days we had to start the trip. This was a gentler but longer trail than our previous day, and I think at least partially this day felt easier because we were buoyed by the lovely company we had to keep our minds off of how ridiculously sore our bodies were from hiking. I didn't have access to Nicole's watch for this hike because the battery that we were charging off of had died the night before, so I'll be getting the statistics for this hike from all trails. They list this hike as 15.9 kilometers covering 823 meters of elevation with about 5 hours and 41 minutes of hiking. Adding this in, the trip now stands at 28 hours and 38 minutes of hiking, 85.91 kilometers of trail covered, and 5,240 meters of elevation. Physio and hiking tip of the day here for day 8 is hydration. Hydration cannot be overstated in its importance, especially when you're doing a lot of hiking. Another reason I think this day felt easier than the previous days was that Nicole and I were much better prepared with our water. We had only taken about 1.5 liters the day before for the two of us because we just underestimated how long it was going to take, and that definitely took a toll with all the work we put in. For this hike, we had about 3 liters between the two of us, which was a much better amount. I would overestimate how much water you need as opposed to underestimate, because yes, it may add weight into your pack, but the risk of being dehydrated is definitely going to be worse than carrying a little bit of extra weight that you didn't have to. And that doesn't even consider the safety risks of becoming dehydrated on the side of a mountain where rescue isn't the easiest. So just pack the water, guys. Just do it. Just take the water with you. 9. Buffalo Wild Wings. Yeah, we did not hike on our last day. We're way too sore and tired to pop on the hiking boots and get back out there for another trail. So instead we had a wonderful slow morning around the campsite, went for a drive down Highway 40 into Kananaskis to see some of the scenery, and then leisurely made our way into Calgary towards our hotel. Going into Kananaskis was really cool because we got to see a lot of other peaks in the area that, you know, maybe we'd want to go hike on a future trip. Just put it out there. We were staying in a hotel close to the Calgary airport to make our 10 a.m. departure the next morning just a little bit easier and less stressful. So we got there, showered, got cleaned up, and decided that we wanted to support a local Calgary business for dinner that night because we really wanted wings, okay? We dehydrated food, and we've been eating PB&J on the back of a car and just like so much trail mix, so we wanted wings, okay? We wanted wings. What kind of sauce did we get? Glad you asked. Barbecue, because we're very adventurous, and mild buffalo, because medium hurts my tum-tum. The tip that I have for day 9 here is that rest on a hiking trip is very important, feels very good, and we should have done more of it. Day 10, flying home to Sudbury. We dropped off our rental car, made it to the airport on time, got through security, and after a long, eventful journey home, made it back to Sudbury, where my wonderful father was there to pick us up from the airport and bring us home, bringing the trip to its conclusion. Oh my goodness, Air Canada, what are you doing? The flight system on Air Canada right now is exactly what you expect it to be. There's a lot of negative press around it, and it's bad. It's definitely bad. Every single flight that Nicole and I had was either delayed or canceled. We were put on standby for a flight that we had been booked on since February, and they lost our luggage on the way home. And I still think we're pretty lucky. One of my favorite parts of the whole flight experience was when we were leaving from Toronto to come back to Sudbury, we got to hear this over the loudspeaker. Hey everyone, this is your captain speaking. We are currently the 3rd plane in line to make it out to the runway, but the 1st plane in line needs the maintenance crew. Turns out that's the same maintenance crew that just came to help us with the door that wouldn't close, and they're with a different aircraft right now. So once that maintenance crew makes their way over and helps out the 1st plane in line, then they're going to be on their way, and we just then have to wait for the other plane in front of us, and then we're good to go. I'm going to be honest with you folks. I've been doing this job for a long time, and well, I've never seen anything quite like this before. Thanks for your patience, everyone. This whole thing is really quite unusual. Anyway, we made it back. Our luggage made it back a few days later. Everything's fine. Tip of the day is don't fly Air Canada in summer of 2022. So let's summarize it all here at the end now that we're safely home and reflecting back on the entire thing. In our trip to Alberta, Nicole and I hiked for 28 hours and 38 minutes, that's not including our food stops and extended breaks, covering almost 86 kilometers of trail and 5,240 meters of elevation up and down. It was a lot of active time and we were exhausted. While I was adding up these totals though, something came to me. our whole trip in terms of trail covered was less than a captain named Kevin is planning on doing in one day for that race through the mountains. I mean, if anyone can do it though. Was it worth it? Well, you watched the video, what do you think? I think absolutely, and I would do this trip again in a heartbeat. It is a lot to hike multiple days in a row. It can be exhausting. You have to deal with weather. You maybe have to get up really early. Organizing things can be a challenge. Food can be a difficulty, but it's a magical experience. It is a beautiful place out there. Camping and being that close to nature was really special. Nicole and I had the time of our lives, and I think it was maybe one of the most amazing trips I've ever been on in my life, and maybe ever will be on. So if you are into this kind of thing, spending time outdoors, I really cannot recommend a hiking trip like this enough, because wow, what an experience. With that in mind, Nicole and I are going on another trip similar to this in August. We're making up for lost time after the COVID lockdowns, where we're going down south to the desert. We're going to be spending some time hiking around Utah and Arizona, going through Sedona, Zion National Park, as well as the Grand Canyon. If you enjoyed this video and want something similar to this, more of something or other, please leave me a comment down below so I know sort of how to guide as I go through that. I think I'm leaning towards doing something similar, getting some footage from the trip and kind of doing a physio reflection on it afterwards. I think there'll be a lot to go on because it's in the desert, but just let me know your thoughts. Let me know what you think. Hopefully my physio and hiking tips were helpful in some way or another as you kind of went through here. If you're looking for anything else, again, reach out in the comments section down below. But I think that's enough of me talking for the day, so hit that thumbs up button if you enjoyed the video. Consider subscribing to the channel if you want notifications on when I release more videos like this or different videos in the physio world. But most importantly though, guys, as always, move your body, have a laugh today, and I will see you at the next video.